Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today for this session. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to please stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during the event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing with valuable content and a great overall experience today. And to ask questions throughout this session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Kishore Viswanathan, Senior Technical Program Manager, Cybersecurity and Compliance at Lucid Motors. We are so excited to have Kishore with us for a keynote presentation titled Data Does It, Reducing Risk in the Enterprise. Welcome, Kishore. Over to you.
Thank you, Vicki. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kishore Viswanathan. I'm a Senior Technical Program Manager at Lucid Motors. And today I'll be presenting this keynote, Data Does It, Reducing Risk in Enterprise. That's the title. So the approach here, which I want to present here, is a very crispy, high level from a senior leadership standpoint. I'll be addressing some of the key challenges as well as the solutions and, of course, the takeaways for this particular topic. I'm going to start with this data. What is data and how it is critical for the organization to protect it? And then also from a different perspective of how the crown jewels that contains the data can also be protected and secured for a better security posture that every company would look forward to. So in that perspective, I'll be covering the first two agenda items, and the second and third is pretty much of the follow through of how a data can be leveraged in a way that the resiliency could be applied, like how the systems that are hosting those data, how the resiliency can be well managed, and the takeaways could be of some examples, the practical exposure to what makes a real-time examples, which I have been working in the companies in the past. I will provide that examples in this particular section when we go there. And the last one is going to be of the third-party risk management, which is also very critical and very high hot button topic in today's cybersecurity world. That's I have some practical examples over there as well as we get there. Okay, so now let's jump into the key topic here. Data is the lifeblood of your organization. Know it and protect it. So this experience which I carry here, is basically from my around 10 years in cybersecurity field, overall around 17 years in IT. I have gone through some of the critical challenges in the companies I worked in, especially my past company in Cisco. The data, how much they value, and what are the ways which we can apply that, the crown jewel and the value the HVA is, and that can be protected and taken to the next level of how that can be also leveraged as a key cash cow for making sure we don't end up in any penalties. Let's start with that. So crown jewel, HVA, is basically kind of critical assets. First thing, before even dive into the deeper sections, the subsequent slides, we need to start with understanding what is HVA. So these are the crown jewels. Every organization has to know that they need to protect these assets. Otherwise, they would end up in costly penalties, because this is from a privacy standpoint I'm talking about. There are laws around this experience, which I'm talking about is from the current company as well as a little bit in the previous company. The privacy is a driving force, a lot of security safeguards we're working on. So if you know the privacy from a GDPR or CCPA or any of that matter from the United States state level regulations, data is key. So how do you know which systems has the HVA, the data, the critical data? So there are tools out there that can discover the data, PII or IP or sensitive data, crawl through the data sources, which could be a structured data source or an unstructured, and they present it in the form of a reporting fashion, which in turn is a key requirement for a regulation from a GDPR standpoint, ROPA, record of processing activities. And what it states is Article 30, you are expected to have a comprehensive central repository of all the business processing activities of the organization, which can be related to a system that contains that data and who is the owner of it, how are you retaining that, and what's the retention policy, and so forth. And the challenge is not many companies has the full visibility. And we have some tools out there. We use current tools like such as ROPA. I can't mention any specific vendor as such, but there are many vendors out there who can does it in a very automated fashion, but it's more of a questionnaires, assessments and surveys, and collect the data, and we can record those in the tools. And also the second one is DSAR, data subject access request. This is also a driving factor for how do we protect the data. So this is for external customers who has data to be deleted or requested for any reason. The company has to provide that in a certain format. So if you don't know what data, where you host it, it will be again a challenge. So the need is that we need to make sure we understand what are the critical assets and what are the PIIs, the sensitive data they contain, and try to map them and store them in a central repository. So that's the one key thing. And the benefits, as I said, that the key is ROPA is a key tool in establishing accountability to compliance authority. And this is primarily talking about the European markets. So most of the American companies, they touch base, the global companies, they have some way of dependency on the European markets. And obviously the processor or controller, in either way, you are expected to maintain the ROPA. So that is the number one requirement if you are doing business globally, especially in Europe. And obviously this places a central source of truth. And also the key challenge which I experienced is like, this is not a security function or a privacy function. It's a combination of both. So privacy in many companies are led by legal. Legal has the ownership of defining the privacy requirements depending on the markets you operate. However, they are not operationally sound to gather the data or map the data or present this to the authorities as and when required. So there's a combination of efforts here. So security team, especially from the function which I am playing, and from InfoSec. So we have the full visibility of implementing the tool that gathers the data, and also move to the next level of mapping the data and creating that managing the tool. And privacy team needs to review the data, validate the data, and takes the next step of communicating the customer or to the DPO or authority. So that's how it goes, a synergy we build between privacy and security teams to bring it to success. So next section is going to be data from a different perspective. So till now I spoke about data, how we protect it after knowing it, because it's critical that we need to do it from a privacy standpoint, because privacy is a key function now in every company. They need to be aware of what the regulations are and how do we protect the customer data or employee data. So now I'm going to talk about from securing the crown jewels from a security standpoint, not from a privacy standpoint. So it's again a data involved in it. So it's a traditional view versus the current view. The traditional view of, if you see to the left-hand side, I'm saying that, it's all that the world is increasingly becoming SaaS oriented, cloud computing oriented, and distributed workforce oriented, remote working. So there's hybrid and remote. So people are working from anywhere. So now there's that brings a lot of challenges. So 7-10 years ago, if you see left-hand side, the data center is centralized, and you can see that public cloud, it was still there, and there's private cloud and hybrid clouds, but all are computer centralized in a centralized fashion. The enterprise security perimeter is dissolving now. And if you see now, it's all more of a SaaS oriented, and everything is is at the edge level. So you see that all the applications and everything are mostly of third parties, and the companies are dependent on them, accessed from anywhere in the world. So that's the way the world is moving. So the left-hand model is dissolving. It is not relevant anymore. And you see the Gartner, it says by 2025, 80% of enterprises will have adopted a strategy, unify web, cloud services, private applications, access using a SASE and SSC architecture, up from 20% in 2021. So that's a significant jump of expectation that companies will adopt this strategy. So what is this approach? What is this architecture? If you see here, as I mentioned, from centralized approach to distributed computing is that intelligent way to connect users to application without compromising security. So this SASE is split into two divisions. One is the security aspect of it, network aspect of it. Another one is more toward the network edge related things. So the SD-WAN and CDN talks more about the network side of it. It's connecting if you're having a branch offices across the country, you can use SD-WAN to intelligently route those in the place of MPLS. And also CDN gives the last mile latency elimination. So it can be much faster. And then the combination also goes along with the security services such as ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, Cloud Architecture Service Broker, and Secure Web Gateway. So these three items comprise the security architecture network edge computing. So these are very critical items. And among that, I need to emphasize the Zero Trust Network. Trust work is implementing identity-based zero trust access policies on the edge network allows enterprise to expand their network perimeter on the remote user. So that's a key part. If you see there, why it is key, because it's a combination of very many technologies. It's a journey. It's not just one solution. If you see that, what does it entail? The benefits, it's more of giving a continuous monitoring validation of the network access, and a principle of least privilege is applied, and it's a device control is applied, micro-segmentation to prevent lateral movement. So it's all when the customer or employee is accessing the network at wherever they are, the security is applied at that location at the edge level. And ZTNA plays a key role. It's an agent-based solution. And also and other components like firewalls and CASB components, they block attacks against the network structure. So it's a combination of that. ZTNA and CASB fulfills these two aspects. Then on top of it, we also can use the URL filtering and DNS query filtering for malicious activity prevention. So these all gives a very good, robust control for companies to secure from a increasingly cloud-oriented business model. And we are talking about companies going at the rate of like from 20% to 80% in the span of 4 years is significant. And after all, I could say the simplified policy management. So the policy is guided by these vendors, the SASE vendors, and there are many out there. And if you go for the one single integrated vendor, you manage that efficiently. Rather, ZTNA may have many components, and you go for that in one vendor and different, but firewall for different, and then CASB for different. Obviously, you have more overhead, you need to deal accordingly. But it's up to the company who have the luxury to spend more and to get the best of the breed, they can do so. But there are companies who can provide integrated services as well. So the next one is cyber resiliency, or BCP and DR. So this is truly my own experience in company Cisco, where a few years ago, I was hands-on in this particular implementation. For several years, I conducted the drills to simulate this business continuity and disaster recovery planning. So I'm going to bring some key value adds here, that takeaways, which are really going to be helpful for the audience, because this is not just a theoretical discussion. This is a real implementation best practice. So if you see here, what is business continuity? First of all, to start with, business continuity is the key cybersecurity function, which is very, very key for a CISO to make sure that we have the proper backup policies and restoration policies, as well as the resilience and capabilities to not only just backup and restoration, to completely bring back up and running in a seamless manner without any downtime. So that's the kind of level of expectations we need to ask. Are we prepared for it? So now I can give two scenarios here. You can see here the BC scenario and DR scenario, the right-hand side boxes. So BC in our approach, I'm talking about large companies was a lot of resources to making sure they are seamlessly recovering from a disaster. Disaster could be of any type. It could be a natural disaster or could be a man-made of cyber attacks. So in the left-hand side, BCP is MVDCs. MVDC is Metro Virtual Data Center. What does it mean? So the data centers over here, active. So they are at the close proximity within the same metro, could be with a distance of 20 miles apart maximum. And then you have a backup DC there. So in that case, if you see, the synchronization is instantaneous, there is no lag. All critical 1 and critical 2 applications need to be in that synchronization mode. There is no active passives kind of situation. So it's anytime one goes down, the other will bring up immediately. And for DR is the next side. It has an active and passive mode, and then also have a backup side. So backup is like a slow process. It's not going to help for instantaneous recovery. However, replication to the passive can always help, because you are going to store the data to the passive data center. It's a replication where it can be stored at a set frequency, where it will be free up in a non-production environment, and can be restored when the event of disaster, then it can be replicated back to the original DC, the active, and failed over. So that's the kind of a mechanism we're talking about in the real world for larger companies. Say both MVDC and DR are practically possible. And if you have both the setups, you're completely covered. So the key elements here, as you see that, what is the key element? What is the first thing you need to talk about before planning for the BCP DR? So we need to identify the criticality, define the criticality of the assets we need to protect or recover. So determine the MTD, meantime, maximum tolerable downtime. RTO is recovery time objective, and RPO is recovery point objective. And we have to create a matrix as to what is the expectation of these based on the business continuity, business impact analysis. Talk to the stakeholders, get their input, make sure define how much time is allowed or maybe it's applicable for restoring that particular function or a service without causing any impact or risk to the function. So that could be a first playbook preparation. And then you also, that's a part of the business impact assessment. And then you also have to have a recovery plan, which also could be in the form of a TTX. It's a tabletop exercise, which involves all the stakeholders, key stakeholders brought to the table and do a drill in terms of how the simulation of in the event of disaster, how the team will be invited for the war room, and how they're going to communicate and address these issues through some scenarios. And then actual simulation testing that could be failover, failback. And as I mentioned, it could be done for both BC scenario, MVDC, or DR scenario, but could be through the coordination of infra team, engineering team, and this production support. And all those teams work together to bring up the systems or services back to normal. So coming quickly to the other ones. So now this I talked about is in the traditional world. Now we have to ask a little bit, one more step ahead to see how much are we prepared to deal with in the case of SaaS related vendors? So that's kind of tricky thing, because increasingly we're dependent on the SaaS vendors, but we're not talking about disaster recovery in the first place when we are signing up a contract. But in our experience, it's very critical to review their capabilities related to disaster recovery, how mature they are, and how frequently they are conducting the backups, and are they able to provide in documentations. You ask for SOC 2 Type 2 report, or you ask for that particular section where they can do a walkthrough, how they did it, what exception they found, and also ask them for participating in their drills, because these are supposed to happen every year at least, to make sure they have a proper failover, failback mechanism, wherever whichever data centers they use. It's called cloud-based VPCs. We need to know. It's our responsibility to ask the right questions. So the scenario I've given an example, quick example, you can go through. These slides will be presented to you offline. I don't know, in the interest of time, I can just quickly run through. So if an organization decides an RTO of 4 hours for C2 application, criticality 2, and disaster at 9 a.m., then the organization service needs to be restored by 1 p.m. So it's technically the time taken to restore to normalcy is 4 hours. So RPO is other hand, basically it's amount of data that can be lost in the event of disaster. So what's a permissible data loss? So you have an example there with the RPO of 4 hours, backup of data is taken 6 p.m. Next it will back up for 10 p.m. The disaster that occurs between 6 and 10 p.m. restored to 6 p.m. backups. Therefore, the resulting maximum of 4 hours data loss. So it always restores back to the previous data backup point. So that's how we this calculator, you measure those during the simulation testing. And it is always a good thing to communicate to the leadership how resilient we are after measuring those RTOs and RPOs. So that's a good practice if you do that on an annual basis. So now quickly to the next section of this presentation. TPRM, that is third-party risk management. So this is getting increasingly high attention in the corporate world now. What does it mean and why it is so important? I'm deriving this presentation based on my experience, and I extensively used in this particular implementation. We implemented from concept to commission of rolling out this tool for the current company I work. So we are defining based on the RMF framework, risk management of NIST 837 publications. If you see there, it goes by that cyclical process of categorize, select, implement, access controls, authorize, and monitor. So they are sticking to the NIST guidelines. So to the right-hand side, if you see there, how does that apply to a NIST framework? If you closely watch, we are exactly applying the same thing. And that's the best practice. That's what we need to do to evaluate SaaS vendors. Third party is predominantly SaaS-based applications. And we try, it's hundreds of, if not thousands of applications we work with across the company in different departments. So sourcing, the first thing you need to make sure is after the RFQ, you narrow down from 4 to 2 or maybe 1 and get the NDA. I mean, of course, for all the 4 people, you get the NDAs and then get narrowed down to the final selection. You have the 1 candidate to get into the onboarding process. We need to make sure we are getting a proper intake. So intake comes from the business requester, from the whichever function or a business function that person belongs to. The person should open a ticket. It has to be channeled to the triaging team, to the help desk, which goes to the IRA. IRA is inherent risk assessment. That's a preliminary risk assessment of the company, the third party, by making sure we have the basic questions answered. So what do you mean by the basic questions answered? These are the fundamental questions, the questions asked about the type of, the nature of the business and the need for the purchase, justification, and do they carry any sensitive data? Do they process any sensitive data? Do they transfer any sensitive data to third party, fourth parties, etc.? So that gives us some sense of what level of inherent risk it carries, a high level, probably 20 questions. And then the TPRA is a very comprehensive question, third-party risk assessment question that goes directly to the vendor. And we have tools in the market. They have automated processes built into it. It can go through workflows to directly to the vendors, copying to the business requester internally, and we get the answers back to the TPRM team that within that InfoSec. So on top of it, you also ask for SOC 2 type 2 report. That's an additional advantage if there is an attested by a third party. It's always more trustworthy. If you don't have, rely on the TPRA. And then we go for additional risk assessment also, such as security scorecards through cyber intelligence, business updates, whatever is available publicly. We got that as well in the form of a scoring. And then consolidate everything and get a value. So that's a calculation. I'll go to the next slide and explain that a little bit deeper. Then we also use it for recertification. The same process repeats. So some of the common challenges, obviously you need to know that this is a very critical function for any cybersecurity domain. CISOs definitely look for the first day of their joining. How are we doing that third-party risk management? Because there's several cyber incidents brought to companies like Target, SolarWinds, etc. It's in the past is significant, and we don't want to take a chance. So if you see there, not all vendors are able to supply the reporting documents, supporting documents. It's an ISO 27001 or SOC 2 type. So that's a common feedback. Like, hey, we don't have any certification. How do I become a vendor? Yeah, then go for that process. An IRA and TPRA has to be filled in. Or security will ask questions. You can answer those. And if they don't fulfill those, then we may have to mitigate those risks, or we may go for alternate candidate. And then the lack of experience, technical resource in the field from evaluating, recommending from end-to-end perspective. So this is a very labor-intensive task because you may end up in evaluating 5 to 10 potential vendors every week of company of our size. So we do have enough resources to do it without compromising the quality, not much. So then it's also a tedious process to complete the assessments, include complete review, flag risk, follow through, remediation. That's very important because remediation and decision. So we can't give a chance just by flagging is not enough. We need to follow through for remediation and making sure they're closed on time. So, all right. Time for, yeah. Is it time for question? No.
Sure, we have time for one. Sure, if you wanted to grab one out of the chat, choose one to
Sure,
answer.
I can, sure. All right, so I was focusing on the presentation. Yeah, so third party is always a concern. Any tip for better vetting of vendors before we sign on them? Definitely. So before vetting them, I would say signing the NDA and inviting for a demo, not only for the functional reasons, I would recommend invite the security team also to the demo. And if the security team InfoSec catches any critical piece while evaluating at in the first place, it's all opportunity to, either find an alternate vendor because there is a serious potential risk there. If not, wait for the InfoSec's feedback to make sure that the risk could be remediated. They may provide the timeline. So that could be the thing I would recommend, the best tip. Include the InfoSec in the first place, in the get-go, while evaluating the tools. And then chatbots and ChatGPT tries. Okay, wrapping up.
Yeah, unfortunately, sure, we're out of time, so I'll let you wrap up.
Yeah, no worries. This last question. I mean, I'm just wrapping up with the last slide. So this is the one which I want to flash quickly. Are you able to see my screen? Okay. So here is the list of checklists you can have. Inherent risk assessment when it's needed. Your org is engaged in third party, existing third party contract is being reviewed, change in scope, or you have other such of a change in third party infrastructure. Anything changes, include the inherent risk assessment. And then, as I mentioned, TPRA, third-party assessment, is a dynamic questionnaire. Have that prepared. And most important, to the right-hand side, how we are calculating the residual risk, meaning after finding inherent risk, we are making sure that controls are effectively applied on that based on the responses received from the vendor, and calculate the residual risk. What is that residual risk? Is that they cannot control at the time of evaluation. So we give them some time to mitigate them. And then if they mitigate, address them, then we provide approval. If not, we reject. Simple. So that's the way the automation process goes in this workflow. And I'm happy to answer any further questions if there are any.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you, Kishore, for this excellent and detailed keynote. I'm sure that there are questions out there. And of course, everyone has your LinkedIn information if they'd like to reach out to you directly. This session, it is available right there on the program materials. This session, along with all of today's content, it will be available following the event on demand. And thank you again, Kishore.
Thank you, everyone.